Hello and welcome to Global Sanctuary for Elephants podcast, Global Rumblings. Global Sanctuary for Elephants, or GSE for short, is a non-profit organization with a mission to create vast safe spaces for captive elephants where they are able to heal physically and emotionally, often from very traumatic pasts. I'm your host, Nadia Mari, and I'll be taking you to the lush jungle of the Mato Grosso region in central Brazil, home of GSE's initial project, Elephant Sanctuary Brazil. Currently home to 6 female Asian elephants, lovingly referred to as the girls. Hello everyone, welcome back and thank you for tuning in this week for a new episode of Global Rumblings. We'll be talking about the sanctuary's 6th elephant.
The cat is already laughing.
I'm laughing. And Cat is already laughing. Okay, we're just going to have a different introduction today. We're going to be talking about Mara. Hi, Kat. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Nadia. How are you?
We're already in Brazil. I'm fine.
Hello.
I'm fine, thank you.
This is one of those days where we wonder about our sanity.
So more coffee?
Oh, always more coffee.
Always more coffee.
Yeah.
I said in the introduction, in our different introduction today, that we are talking about Mara, your 6th elephant. I was reading up a little bit on her on your website. I'll link up to that in the show notes. She's got wonderful golden eyes, I read. Unfortunately also, or sadly, also a typical story, stolen from the wild, India, brought to circus, confiscated under the new laws, sent to a zoo in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So yes, tell us about Mara. How did you get to know about her?
Well, Miss Mara and her golden eyes. Indeed, she has very golden eyes that shine just as bright today as they did 4 years ago or 3 years ago. I don't know how long she's been here.
4 years. Actually, the 13th
years.
of May 2020 she was rescued. So
Happy
coming up
anniversary,
now.
Mara. So Mara is the classic story stolen from the wild, as you said, sent in a life of slavery for human entertainment. Some tend to tolerate it better than others. None of them do really well. And Mara was one that became very aggressive. Mm-hmm. Actually killed a couple of people on the circus.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's not surprising. You put a human through that level, really any emotional being through that level of trauma, starting from infancy, it's going to take its toll on them. And some of them, go inward, as we've talked about with Gita, going into her very methodical swaying, being disconnected from the world around her a little bit. And then others are a little bit more outward and boisterous.
And when we've talked about the difference between Asian and African elephants, that African elephants are very reactionary and Asian elephants are very cerebral about things. The first person that we know of that Mara had killed was her very first trainer, but she did not do anything when she was with him initially. She was with a circus that sold her. She was sold to a different circus, and then I think she was yet shifted to another circus. And it was at that circus that they were having problems with handling her, and they ended up hiring her original trainer to help them with her. And it was during that stint that after she had been with him for a little while that she ended up killing him. And that is part of that. We've talked about that they can internalize and hold on to these things. And she is one of these elephants that she's very watchful and she's looking for caregivers doing something wrong. She's looking for little weak moments. She just has this personality where she is super analytical that way and kind of studies people.
She's very studious of people's movements.
Yeah.
Even until now, it's not that she's going to be doing something, but she has that thing in the back of her head said, if I need to in the future, where's my opportunity? And you can see her being hyper analytical, very smart, very, very intelligent. And so the zoo did a good thing of taking her in, giving her a new life. Unfortunately, they did not have the capacity to provide the best space for her. At some point, they brought in 2 young African elephants. And they lived together. All 3 of them were together for a number of years.
They were 3 years old when they arrived, and they stayed together for 10 years with Mara.
Okay.
And then as they got older, there was conflict of some sort. I don't think anybody knows the exact origin, but one of the African elephants ended up in the moat. They presumed that it was a fight between them. And from that point forward, they had Mara separated from the African elephants. Unfortunately, and this is a very familiar story for many captive elephants as well, when facilities do not have the proper space, they don't have the proper design, and they have conflict, social conflict, everybody gets compromised. And what they had there was each elephant would be outside, or each group of elephants, Mara by herself, and then two Africans, they would be outside for about 4 hours out of the day, and then the rest of the time they'd be inside the barn. So you're looking at 20 hours out a day in a really small barn with not a lot of stimulation at all. Concrete walls on one side, a lot of steel on the other side. And one of the most surprising things for us when we were there was how close together the bars are, which I understand from a safety perspective because she is an aggressive elephant that carried forward those aggressive tendencies even in the zoo, even after being removed from the circus. But the bars were really, really close together. Okay. And you actually couldn't see her. For me, it was one of the strangest things of you couldn't read her at all because you couldn't see enough of her. You couldn't see, you could see maybe her eye, but we couldn't see her eye and her facial expression at the same time.
When he says it was close together, I mean, it was so close together that she couldn't even fit the very beginning of her trunk. Like her nose couldn't fit through the bars. That's how close it was. You're talking about like an inch between each bar.
Yeah, you could put your hand through, but that's about it. Yeah. And you can go very far. So it's, again, from a safety perspective, I get it, but from a elephant management perspective, it was impossible to read, and it would actually be impossible for her to read them as well.
Mm-hmm. And they built that especially for her?
I don't recall that part of the story, to be honest. I don't know if they built it. I know they modified it for her, but I don't know what was in place when she actually arrived there.
Yeah. All I had known was that after she attacked their veterinarian, who she did almost kill as well, from the story I was told was that he managed to fit enough into the corner that as she was trying to crush him with her head, she just couldn't manage because her head was so big that she couldn't get it into the corner enough to do that. And it was after that they modified her enclosure and made it so that all the bars were very close together. And
so it was very strange. And it actually created even more isolation for her, in my perspective, more isolation because she really couldn't see much of what was going on. She looked through the grates, but, imagining her inside that box looking into the outside world, it was almost, we talked about in the past, we talked about Poche and Gijimina and their concrete pit that they were in. That was actually more open than Mara's barn in many ways because you really couldn't see anything. Poche and Gijimina could at least look upward and see out.
And throw rocks at people.
But also Poche and Gijimina had more freedom to inside and outside all day long. They were never isolated into for 4 hours a day, had access outside.
And they had each other at least.
Right. And 20 hours a day, Mara's isolated. But it was the same for the Africans, 4 hours outside the day and 20 hours inside.
Yeah, but their inside stall wasn't made the same way as Mara's. No, you can see them.
Yeah, it's a different type of construction.
So talking about African elephants, we had talked about this before during one of your fundraisers last year for your female African habitat, because when you do get female African elephants, they will not be staying with the female Asian elephants. So is that unusual for zoos to mix Asian and African elephants because they are two different species?
Once upon a time it was. I mean, the same once upon a time where it was okay to beat your elephant to get them to do things. When you don't have the understanding of the complexities and the differences in all their socialization, their communication, their emotions, it's, they're elephants, let's put them together. But as that understanding grew, most facilities no longer, AZA, the American Zoological Association, it's in their, rules that you're not supposed to house them together. And it is because of all of those differences and the aggression that ends up resulting a lot of times from having the species mixed. It would be like keeping a lion and a tiger together. Oh, they're both cats, but you don't keep them together because they're very different. They're a different species. And it's no different for elephants. We had in Tennessee, one of the elephants that came there, Delori, ended up, the main reason she was sent from the zoo she was at was because she had been housed with Africans, and it was fine for a while until it wasn't, which is what happens, just like with Mara and Kuky and Pupy. They can get along for a little while, but the differences are so significant that at some point something happens and there was a big fight and Delori almost lost her eye and they had to separate the African elephants from her. And again, everybody had to rotate through the exhibit. So everybody was spending a lot of time inside. And it's the typical story when you mix the species.
And it doesn't mean it can't go well. I mean, there are times that the relationships are good, and you can put a cow and a horse together and they can get along fine, or you could put a cow and a horse together and they don't want anything to do with each other.
Yeah.
One of the differences with African elephants in their nature, they are more physical beings than Asian elephants are. Asian elephants are a little bit more grounded. And when Africans play or when Africans are aggressive, it's much more assertive. It's much more physical, and it's much more physical than with Asian elephants. And you can have conflict with Asian elephants to Asian elephants. It doesn't mean you're not going to have fights between two Asian elephants, and that has happened many times, especially in small spaces. But one of the differences that happens is it becomes an unfair advantage for most of the time for the African elephants, because they have tusks, because of the way their bodies move. They are more agile. They are more.
They seem to not have bones in certain parts of their bodies.
They're faster. They can spin faster. I mean, everything's a little bit more. They're a little bit more agile. A little bit more. I'm going to say athletic, for lack of a better way of describing that. And so it becomes an unfair advantage. So if you have two Asian elephants fighting, they're going to be fighting with the same kind of temperament, same type of physique, and physical limitations, where African elephants just creates an unfair advantage against an Asian elephant. So again, it doesn't mean it can't go well, but many times it has gone wrong, which is what led to the promotion of regulations or suggestions to not house the two species together. And as Kat said, we're trying to give them the best life possible. And a lot of that is the emotional and psychological and social balance. And to do that, the best way to do that is to have common species. The way they communicate, the way they play, the way they socialize is vastly different. One thing that's been really interesting that we've seen back in Sanctuary in Tennessee and a little bit here with Mara is Asian elephants who have spent time with African elephants, they tend to carry with them a little bit more of that physical dominance, a little bit more of that physical assertiveness than generally what you see with Asian elephants.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in Tennessee, you had Winky, who really didn't have any friends except for Sissy because she didn't know how to socialize properly. And she was, I don't want to say aggressive, but she was too forward that way. And none of the other elephants trusted her. And Sissy took her under her wing. And Winky was great with Sissy, but not with everybody else. And Delory had Misty. But Delory and Winky actually hated each other. That's the most confrontational
they were all
I've
Asian
seen.
elephants.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they lived 10 years.
Yeah, Delory lived with African elephants and Winky lived with African elephants.
Yeah, she lived with Penny.
But they just never saw eye to eye at all.
Yeah. From the very beginning, those two had it out for each other. It was very strange, but, neither socialized with the rest of the herd properly. They didn't socialize with each other properly. And you have aspects when we talk about Mara, and clearly we're skipping all over the place at this point. But some of the things that have happened with Bambi, aren't typical for an Asian elephant and aren't really in the social structure and rules of an Asian herd, aren't really acceptable. And we know that these elephants don't come knowing these rules, most of them. They've lived, 40, 50 years by themselves. But they all seem to catch on really quickly and shift really quickly. And you have elephants like Hana who are definitely, they seem to take the other elephants under their wings after they initially arrive and have some sort of silent communication about rules and regulations. With Mara being really close with Bambi and then deciding she didn't want to be friends early on after she arrived. And then they worked through that and they've been friends for a while. And now Mara is seemingly going to that place again of, not necessarily really wanting to be friends, and Mara just not really being the open and soft elephant that you're used to seeing with Asian elephants. It seems like a lot of what came about with her time with African elephants has definitely stayed with her. And that's what we see with elephants that live with African elephants. So when people ask about them staying together, yeah, it can happen sometimes. And I only know of one instance where they were really bonded and it was actually quite a beautiful relationship. But
long-term social confusion.
Yeah.
So going back to Mara's time at the zoo, I read on your website that she was there for 25 years and that they have transferred to becoming an eco park. Is that a reason why she was sent to you, or did they reach out to you? How did you then find out about her?
Yeah, I actually think the process started before we even fully agreed. There was actually a court order that transferred her to the custody of the sanctuary in Brazil, to Elephant Sanctuary Brazil, the organization, long before we were ready for her. So we actually had jurisdiction over her before we were even ready. But that's the way they did that, to kind of force that process forward. Because of her confiscation from circus, living in the zoo, the issues that were at the zoo was looking for a long-term solution for her as well. And this coincided with this idea to transform the model of the zoo, going into an eco park, moving many hundreds of animals, thousands of animals to sanctuaries internationally at great cost, financially and man hours, to deal with all the logistics, to find appropriate sanctuaries. And it is one of the most compelling, the most inspiring stories that I think we've heard coming out of the zoo world in many, many, many years, because of the initiative that city took to say, we have done this wrong. Let's do what we can to make it right. And so many people are afraid to admit that you did wrong, but that's the first step to a positive future, is to say, let's reanalyze what it is that we're doing and how can we make it better. And we have complete respect for the city and for all the entities that were involved with that decision. The mayor at the time, who said, no, let's make it right. Let's make a change. And that's where this all came from, not only from Mara, but from many other animals, the 2 African elephants that are still there. And that started a communication to see what we could do to prepare for Mara's move. Through that time period, the next few years, I think that started in 2015 or 16, until her arrival, we visited the zoo on a few different occasions in our time in Argentina, taking care of Pelusa. We had a few visits there. I think you spent 2 or 3 days there. My visits were a little bit shorter, but it was nice also because the zoo was transitioning with the team. A lot of the older team that was there remained physically dominant towards her. Mm-hmm. Very controlling towards her. And it was one of my first visit, which was the old team. It was interesting because Mara was hyper cooperative. She was waiting for them to open up the foot door so she could present her foot. And she'd put her foot up and they'd say, no, put your foot down. And like, now put your foot up. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why do you need to control them this way? You need to maintain control over them. It's like, you're not controlling anything. She's behind a giant wall. You can't force her to do anything. I said, can you show her a little gratitude instead? And they didn't care for that comment at all. But it was interesting because the next time Kat went, they were transitioning even further. And that was it. Kat visited and saw some of the conflict that was there, and met with the zoo director. And shortly thereafter, they transitioned the entire team, because that zoo was interesting too. Is the elephant handlers or elephant keepers. They had an enrichment team, they had behavioral team, they had training teams and nutrition teams. And all the other teams are great, but the primary keepers were the one that were still have these old school mindsets. And the next time I went, it was completely different. They shifted everybody. The vibe in the barn was different. There was so much more compassion and respect and understanding for the elephants. It was just a beautiful transition within that same facility. So even though they couldn't make the lives for the elephants better by changing the facility because of the restrictions that were there, they could at least make the lives better by bringing in a team that was empathetic and compassionate and caring. Yeah. So from there, moved into elephant transport, which was through a couple of years. And as we were getting all the permits and all the procedures and getting all that worked out, we were building the sanctuary here, finishing with new enclosures, creating the space that was available for Mara, constant contact with the team from Buenos Aires. We were getting ready to bring the elephant transport crate there, and that's when the pandemic started.
Oh, okay. Of course, 2020 she came, so it was just before then, the lockdown and everything.
Yeah, and when we moved the crate there was not a lockdown, and that was supposed to be there for 30 days approximately, and it was within days of coming back home that they shut the border. Oh, no. So that left a giant question, how is this going to happen? How are we going to move an elephant? And I don't remember how long it was after, how long that ended up being delayed. So there ended up being a bit of a delay because of the pandemic and all the logistics.
But one of the cute things that happened with the crate training was it was really the first time that the caregivers were able to work with Mara and see her at the same time because they were trying to get her to go in the crate and they were doing things with her while she was in the crate to get her comfortable, the same stuff we would always do. It's pretty open. There are 3 or 4 bars on the front and that's it. So it was the first time that they could actually really see her face. They would close up behind her and they would use a broom to like scratch her bum. And it was very bonding. And it was really nice for all of them, Mara included, because as far as I know, it was the first time she really received affection from those who were caring for her and her caregivers.
I think there was definitely more verbal affection as time went on, but as physical because of the restriction of the facility. Of course, they could see her face when she was in the exhibit, but when they were doing any sort of training with her in the bars, you couldn't see much at all. And then one of the things I was concerned about, and we had a meeting with the staff, is, hey guys, remember, this is not your barn anymore. This is a much more open enclosure, so you can see her, she can reach her trunk through more. It's easier to make mistakes. And with that type of barn design, it's easy for caregivers to be more relaxed because there's not really anywhere that she can grab them easily. So they needed to have a heightened level of awareness. But with this, as Kat said, it just created a beautiful, beautiful opportunity, and the joy in everybody's eyes was apparent. And I think, again, for Mara as well, there's a lot of physical interaction. She lapped that up, enjoyed that attention. And during that time, because she was still transitioning with the African elephants, so they're taking turns inside and outside. And at this time, they actually started having them stay outside at night at times. They started a transition where allowing the elephants to stay each one night would be Mara outside, the next night would be the Africans outside. So they actually got more freedom, more mobility, more exercise, more stimulation that way. With them being inside and outside at night, the African elephants had access to the crate as well. So we had Kuky and Pupy that had their first introduction to the elephant transport crate. So when it comes time for the crates to go back there.
Well, it's also a little dangerous because they have a tendency to be a little more destructive and generally a lot stronger.
They did pretty well. They didn't cause too much damage to the crate. Yeah. The crate is designed to contain an elephant, but it's not designed to be in an exhibit for a long period of time. But they did pretty well. They didn't cause too many hardships on the crate.
So the cat is out of the bag. Sorry for the pun, Cat, for supporters and listeners who are not aware that, yes, Kuky and Pupy are actually the 2 female African elephants for whom you have been building the new habitat.
Yeah, building the new habitat and waiting on permits. We should be hopefully getting closer, but this has been a lengthy process. It's one of the many bureaucratic hurdles here that don't always make sense. But we met with another team of lawyers the other day, and they just said you just have to go through the process. If you try to circumvent it, if you try to, try to file legal action, it's just going to create more problems. So right now we're just going through those steps. We know that it's slow. We know the elephants are continuing not in an ideal world while waiting, but there's not a lot of option away from that.
The permit saga, we have talked about that a lot, and I don't really think there's anything logical about it. The zoo wants to relinquish their elephants. You want the elephants, so why isn't it happening? But yeah, we'll have to wait then. Fingers crossed.
It doesn't always make sense. And looking in from the outside, you see these zoos that have battled for years to keep their elephant, and sanctuaries or nonprofit organizations that are welfare organizations that are battling to release the elephant. That goes on for years and years and years. In here, we have this ideal scenario. You have the zoo that says, hey, let's change, let's make her life better. And we're saying, great, we're part of that. We can receive her. And then you're kind of stuck in this middle zone of what about the permits?
Yeah, because it's not even just Pupy and Kuky. It's also Kenya from Mendoza, who is also already trained and could go. They have to undergo quarantine, but that's just 30 days. And all 3 of them are waiting on Ibama Brasilia to decide to sign off on the permits.
Yeah.
And speaking of permits, now the question came up, how are we going to move an elephant during a pandemic with borders closed?
Yeah, but that will have to be a cliffhanger because I know that you're on a very tight schedule and time is running out, and I think we could not give enough time to that subject. So unless you can finish it off very quickly.
I can't finish
Nadia, how long have you known Scott for? Seriously? Did you just ask that question?
No, it's actually a really compelling story.
And it was definitely one of those things that we weren't sure was going to happen.
And it was from both sides. The zoo was in the same place of, can we do this? How are we going to do this? And I don't think if it was any other facility, I don't know that it would have happened. I think it's the diligence of that facility, the motivation of that facility to make things work the way they did. But it wasn't easy. A lot of communications to open the doors.
It was one of those perfect storm.
Yeah.
Everything had to come together to make it happen, and somehow it did.
Yeah.
It did, yeah. But she came on the 13th of May to Sanctuary, so within the first part of the year, so that's great. Okay, so we'll catch up then for our next recording, and you can tell us more about crate training and how Mara fared. And then you loaded up and drove off quite a distance from Argentina to Brazil. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know at the moment you are very, very busy. Not only am I very appreciative, but also your supporters and all the listeners. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Nadia. Sorry we are short on time today, but it is sanctuary life. Always more to do than we have time to do.
Okay, take care.
All right. Thanks, Nadia. Take care.
Bye, Nadia.
Bye. That's all that we have time for this week. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. Another great zero-cost way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating or a glowing review, as this helps other people discover the podcast. Thank you so much, and until we meet up in 2 weeks' time, take care.